So that in itself is very unusual. And we do have 3 items here that were here when General Jackson passed away. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But of course, right across from you would have been the Chandler Plantation. This building would have had many uses over the life of the building. Originally used as the farm office. It had been used as, one of the Chandler's son was young. He had just gotten out of medical school and proposed to his father. Don't have a lot of money, just getting started, Dad. How about if I use this as my a doctor's office? And he'll actually split this house in 2 or put a wall, dividing a wall. That's why we have the 2 doors. And I'll see my patients over here, and my family can live on this side. Father goes for that. When the time General Jackson arrives here is simply used for Mrs. Chandler's storage area. We're lucky if we have a closet at home, we can stuff things in when we get that call. I'll be right over, and you think, oh, doggone it. But she would just put her things out here, and so you can imagine this was stuffed to the gills, if you will. Now, General Jackson, on May 2nd, you have to think, had an incredible day. He pulled off a flank attack that was really against all odds and numbers and was very successful. And think of the word momentum. He thought maybe one more push that evening might end that battle. And so he's going to order the 18th North Carolina. They're coming up into position. And he'll say to them, in effect, I'm going to go right around out front, do a reconnoitering and see where they are. And we may go ahead and fight. And then he'll say, whatever shoots in front of you, or whatever moves in front of you, be sure you shoot him. And so General Jackson will ride out, and he'll be surprised when he bumps into the Union Army fairly quickly. And he will turn and ride back towards his own men, and they will fire upon him. Now he's furthest back in the group. He has 8 people that are in front of him and around him. He's the furthest back. You'd think he might have a little bit of protection from that firing. But he's actually the one that takes the most bullets. 1 man will be killed, but Jackson will be wounded in his right hand, very insignificant, but this left arm is a major problem. He had an entry wound right about the wrist. It travels up. That right there is going to be an amputation at the elbow. But then he gets a second wound, kind of right here where the arrowhead is, up at the top of the shoulder, and that nicks an artery and breaks a bone. And so that's going to be an amputation right there up at the shoulder. Now, unfortunately, it takes 2.5 hours to get him off to the field hospital. And they'll drop him off the litter twice. When he arrives at the field hospital, Dr. Hunter Holmes McGuire knows that he has to amputate that arm quickly. So some people that have no medical knowledge at all are going to get pulled in on this amputation. Arm will be amputated quickly, and within about 4 hours, the general is alert. He's asking for some coffee and food. He's doing quite well. Dr. Hunter Holmes McGuire is very surprised at his progress. Word is going to go back to General Lee that he will survive those wounds. So now General Lee can't stop fighting the Battle of Chancellorsville because General Jackson's down. He'll replace him with A.P. Hill, who will be quickly wounded, and then Jeb Stuart will take over and do that fighting on May 3rd. But General Lee will say to Dr. Hunter Holmes McGuire, as soon as you feel he can travel, get him to a safe place. And folks, that's where we're standing, in that safe place. Guinea Station would have been a large Confederate depot. If you would have looked out any of these windows, you would have seen Confederate soldiers. And the train is coming up from Richmond or going down to Richmond, bringing soldiers, supplies, ammunition, everything you need to fight a battle over here at Chancellorsville. So on the morning of May 4th, they decide General Jackson is well enough to travel. They'll put him in a wagon, and then they'll jostle him over 27 miles of bad roads here in Virginia. And that'll be a long trip for the general. He won't arrive here until about 8 p.m. Mrs. Chandler throws open the doors of her home and says, I'm ready to welcome the general. And Dr. Hunter Holmes McGuire, his physician, will say, ma'am, I need to look through your house first. So he's going to not mind too much what he sees on the first floor, a lot of Confederate wounded soldiers, but upstairs there are 4 soldiers that have a contagious disease, and General Jackson does not need any more things to contend with. And so Dr. Hunter Holmes McGuire will say, I'll take that building out there. She's appalled because doggone it, this is her storage area. And so she's going to make some attempts to make this storage area more comfortable for the general. So he does again arrive here on the evening of May 4th. They'll bring him in the door you entered in. They'll bring him right over here, and I'll let you all go in there. as much as you can, and they'll place him on that bed in there. The bed in there is the bed he died on. So please go ahead and go on in there, and I can talk to you from out here. And you're welcome to take pictures with flash. There's no problem with that. General Jackson again arrives on May 4th. Things are going well until the morning of May 7th, and then Dr. Hunter Holmes McGuire will first hear the sounds of pneumonia in his lungs. Back then, that was a death sentence, simply because the men that were going to invent those antibiotics later on hadn't even been born yet. You need antibiotics to get you over pneumonia. And so they basically know that that is a death sentence. And it was really ironic that his wife was marooned from him. She'd been notified fairly quickly after he'd been wounded, simply because her brother had been riding with General Jackson when he was wounded. And he'll say to her brother, please go get my wife, your sister. She would want to be here, and I would want her here with me. And so she's very quickly notified of the wounding of her husband. Don't worry, Mrs. Jackson, he's fine. She's doubting that. But ironically enough, the tracks out here, Jackson was at West Point in that famous class of 1846. His roommate was George Stoneman, who didn't choose to fight for the Confederacy, but chose to fight for the Union Army. And he'll get those tracks out there torn up. And if you're a Confederate person, you're not going to be going south to Richmond. Mrs. Jackson will not be coming up with their 5-month-old baby. So think of how she feels down there in Richmond from the 2nd to the 7th, trying to get to her husband and unable to do so. She's worrying about how he's doing, and she says in her memoirs later, when she stepped off the train, the faces of the escorting officers told her everything she needed to know. She knows the news is not good. She'll come in with their 5-month-old baby and go into the room and say, Thomas, Julie and I are finally here. And he's not coherent enough to know that. And she'll try it a couple of times. And then when she sees the extent of how bad her husband is, she primarily is going to send the baby over to the main house. Some of the ladies will comment that many times the baby went hungry, simply because Mrs. Jackson was afraid to leave her husband. She is going to stay with her husband. They're very religious. She would sing songs, hymns to him. She would read from the Bible. They particularly liked Isaac Watts hymns. And those hymns are still in our church hymnals today. They're a little bit more like a dirge. And I was real surprised this last Christmas when I was singing Christmas songs with my granddaughter and found that he had written Joy to the World. And I thought, I never would have guessed that for Isaac Watts, because like I said, they're pretty mundane, the tune, the verse anyway, you know. So anyway, on Sunday, May 10th, Dr. Hunter Holmes McGuire will come to Mrs. Jackson and say he will not survive the day. She'll basically ask for everyone to leave the room. Think of how important this man was to General Lee. Aides and couriers are going to be riding very frequently here to check on the general, to report back to General Lee. You're going to have a lot of people coming here checking on him. They're in this room right here. The men might go up there to rest. There's no privacy for this couple, and so she simply asks for everyone to leave, except Jim Lewis, who will be standing on the step you're standing on. That's fine, you can stand. No, you are just fine. Jim Lewis is a freed black gentleman that has been with General Jackson for several years. And so Mrs. Jackson again will call for the baby. It is a Victorian tradition to present the child to the dying parent. And she'll come in with the baby and she'll say, Thomas, Julia and I are here. And the doctor says you'll be in heaven this evening. And again, he's not coherent. He's not understanding. And she'll come back out and she'll wait for a while, piecing in here with her baby. She'll try it again and she'll go in and she'll say, Thomas, the doctors say you'll be with our Lord this evening. And after a minute or two, he'll look over and very clearly say, Anna, what day is it? She's amazed he's speaking like that. And she'll say, Thomas, it's Sunday. And he'll think about it for a minute and he'll say, then I prefer it. I always wish to die on a Sunday. With that, she has a lucid husband, folks. She takes the baby to him. She'll help him hold that baby. Remember that amputated arm. He'll call her my little comforter, and how very beautiful she is. And then Mrs. Jackson, seeing how tired he is, she'll ask the ladies to take the baby to the main house. Mrs. Jackson will stay with them, but again, she still has a lucid husband. And folks, she was 33, he was 39. Those of us are a little older. If I look back on my 30s, I was never going to get white hair. I wasn't going to get old. I think we all think that. That just happens to other people. And they hadn't had a talk about where he wanted to be buried. So she will go to him and say, Thomas, I don't even know where you want to be buried. And he'll reply, Lexington. And what do the baby and I do when you're gone? Go back to your parents in North Carolina. They're good people and they'll take care of you. And so she gets those questions answered, and then he gets closer and closer to death. And by that point, she's kneeling on the floor there by the bed. Primarily the accounts say her head is on his chest and she's sobbing. She's trying to pray with him. She's trying to sing a hymn to him, shore him up, but she's pretty much a mess in there. She kneels by his side, as I said, with her head on his chest. She would know that about 3 o'clock she thinks she has lost him. And then all of a sudden, if you've been with anyone that's passed, many times